I'm Lucille Hargrove, 67, and I thought I knew everything about my husband Michael until September 11th changed everything. When those towers fell, I lost more than my soulmate of 34 years. I lost my sense of reality. His family immediately swooped in, demanding his life insurance payout, claiming I didn't deserve it after all these decades together. They painted me as the manipulative wife who had controlled their beloved Michael for too long. I was drowning in grief, barely able to function, when the phone rang. Mrs. Hargrove, this is Agent Rodriguez from the FBI. We need to talk about your husband. What they revealed about Michael's life and death would shatter everything. I thought I knew about the man I'd shared my entire adult life with. Before we jump back in, tell me where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Like this video. If you've ever discovered that the people closest to you were hiding earth-shattering secrets, that Tuesday morning started like any other in our small Queens apartment. I remember every detail now, though at the time it felt so ordinary. Michael was up at 5:30 a.m., same as always, padding around our bedroom in his slippers, careful not to wake me, but I was already awake, listening to the familiar sounds of his morning routine. The coffee maker gurgled to life in the kitchen, and I could hear him shuffling through his morning papers. When I finally joined him, his coffee cup sat on the counter, still warm to the touch, steam rising from the dark liquid. He'd taken only a few sips. That detail haunts me now, how he left that coffee behind, how he seemed distracted, almost nervous. "You're up early," he said, not looking up from the newspaper spread across our small kitchen table. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, pouring myself a cup from the pot he'd made. "You seem restless too." Michael looked up then, and I caught something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Not exactly fear, but something close to it. A weight he was carrying that I couldn't identify. "Just thinking about work," he said, folding the paper with unusual precision. "Big case coming up." He'd been an insurance adjuster for 30 years, or so, I thought. Big cases weren't unusual, but his manner was. The way he kept checking his watch, the nervous energy radiating from him as he buttered his toast. "Will you be late tonight?" I asked, settling into my chair across from him. "Maybe. Don't wait up if I'm not home by 8. He kissed my forehead before leaving, lingering just a moment longer than usual. I should have recognized it as goodbye, but how could I? Michael left for work every morning. This was just Tuesday. I spent the morning cleaning, doing laundry, planning dinner. The television was on in the background, some morning show discussing fall fashion trends, normal life, normal concerns. Then the world exploded. The first plane hit at 8:46 a.m. I was folding Michael's shirts when the news bulletin interrupted the regular programming. My first thought wasn't fire, it was confusion. How does a plane accidentally hit a building? The reporters seemed just as bewildered, speculating about pilot error, mechanical failure. I tried calling Michael's office. The line was busy. When the second plane hit at 9:03 a.m., confusion turned to terror. This wasn't an accident. Someone had done this deliberately. The towers where my husband worked every day were under attack. I called again. Still busy. By 9:30 a.m., I was frantic. The phones weren't working. The towers were burning on every channel. People were jumping. My Michael was somewhere in that chaos, and I couldn't reach him. I grabbed my purse and headed for the subway, determined to get to Manhattan, to find him somehow. But the trains had stopped running. The bridges were closed. The city was locked down. And I was trapped in Queens while my husband was trapped in hell. The first tower fell at 9:59 a.m. I collapsed on my kitchen floor, watching the impossible happen on television. The building where Michael worked, where he'd gone every morning for 3 decades, was gone. Just gone. A pile of dust and debris where the World Trade Center used to stand. The second tower fell at 10:28 a.m. I stayed on that floor for hours, staring at the television, waiting for someone to tell me this was all a mistake, that Michael would call, that he'd walk through the door with that gentle smile and explain how he'd gotten out, how he was safe. He never called. The confirmation came 2 days later, when they found his name on the list of those who'd been in the North Tower. Michael Hargrove, 65, insurance adjuster, confirmed deceased. But that warm coffee cup on our kitchen counter told a different story. Michael had known something was coming. He'd been preparing for something I couldn't understand. In 34 years of marriage, I'd never seen him leave a full cup of coffee behind. That cup would be the first crack in everything I thought I knew about my husband. They arrived before the smoke had even cleared from Manhattan. Michael's sister Margaret showed up at my door Thursday evening, barely 48 hours after the towers fell, with her husband Frank in tow. His brother Tom arrived Friday morning with his wife Linda, both of them clutching overnight bags like they were planning to stay. I was still in my nightgown at 2 in the afternoon, unable to process the basics of daily life, when Margaret pushed past me into my living room like she owned the place. "Lucille, honey, we need to talk about practical matters," she said, settling into Michael's favorite chair without invitation. "I know this is hard, but we can't put off the important decisions." Important decisions. My husband was dead, and she was talking about decisions. The funeral arrangements, I began, but Tom cut me off. "The insurance, Lucille, we need to discuss Michael's life insurance policy." I stared at him. "Insurance, Tom, I haven't even planned the funeral yet." "That's exactly why we're here," Margaret said, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd endured for 34 years. "You're in no condition to handle these things alone. We're family. We're here to help." Help. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Frank produced a leather briefcase and began spreading papers across my coffee table. "We've taken the liberty of gathering Michael's important documents, his will, insurance policies, bank statements." "How did you get those?" I asked, confused. "His office is gone." "Yes," Margaret said. "But Michael was smart. He kept copies of everything at our house. You know how he always said you weren't good with paperwork." I didn't remember Michael ever saying that, but grief does strange things to memory. Maybe I was forgetting things. Maybe I had always been useless with financial matters. "The life insurance policy is substantial," Tom continued, running his finger down a page of dense text. $500,000. That's a lot of money, Lucille, more than you're used to handling. "What are you saying?" Margaret leaned forward, her face arranged in what she probably thought was a sympathetic expression. "We're saying you don't have to shoulder this burden alone. Tom works in finance. He knows about these things. He could help you manage the money, make sure it's invested properly." "It's not about the money," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Michael is dead." "Of course it's not about the money," Linda said, speaking for the first time. "But Michael would want you to be taken care of. He'd want his family to make sure you're not taken advantage of." "Taken advantage of? By whom?" "There will be lawyers," Frank said, "insurance investigators, people who will try to minimize the payout. You need someone who understands these things." I looked at the papers spread across my table. Michael's name was everywhere, but I could barely focus on the words. Everything felt surreal, like I was watching someone else's life unfold. "I don't understand," I said. "It's life insurance. He's dead. They pay out the policy." Tom and Margaret exchanged a look that should have warned me. "It's not that simple," Tom said. "There are clauses, conditions, and given the circumstances, the terrorist attack, there might be complications." "What kind of complications?" "The insurance company might investigate," Margaret said. "They'll want to make sure Michael wasn't involved in anything that would void the policy." "Involved in what?" "Michael was a victim." "Of course he was," Frank said quickly. "But insurance companies are suspicious by nature. They'll dig into his background, his activities, his associations. It's standard procedure." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the September air. "What associations?" "Nothing specific," Tom said. "But Michael traveled a lot for work. He met a lot of people. Insurance companies get nervous about international connections these days." "International connections?" Michael had occasionally traveled for work, but I'd never thought much about it. He'd come home with stories about difficult clients, complicated cases, nothing that seemed suspicious. "The point is," Margaret said, "you'll need help navigating all this. And frankly, Lucille, you've never been involved in Michael's business affairs. You might not understand the questions they'll ask." She was right about that. In 34 years of marriage, Michael had handled all our finances. I paid the household bills, but the big decisions, investments, insurance, taxes, those were Michael's domain. He'd always said I didn't need to worry about such things. "So what are you suggesting?" I asked. "Let Tom handle the insurance claim," Margaret said. "He knows how to deal with these companies. He can make sure you get what you deserve. And in return," Tom shifted uncomfortably. "Well, there would be fees, administrative costs, and given the amount of time this might take." "How much?" I interrupted. 30%, Frank said. That's standard for this type of service. $150,000. They wanted $150,000 to fill out paperwork. That seems like a lot, I said. It's what lawyers would charge, Margaret said. And Tom's family. He has your best interests at heart. Family. That word again. As if being Michael's siblings gave them some claim on his life insurance. I need to think about this, I said. Of course, Margaret said, but her smile was tight. But don't think too long. These things have deadlines. After they left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by papers I couldn't understand, feeling more alone than ever. Michael's coffee cup was still on the kitchen counter, unwashed. I couldn't bring myself to move it. That's when I found the manila envelope tucked behind the toaster. Michael's handwriting on the outside, for Lucille important papers. Inside were copies of the same documents Tom and Margaret had shown me, the same life insurance policy, the same bank statements, but there was something else, a note in Michael's careful script. Lucy, if anything happens to me, don't trust anyone, not even family, especially not family. Find the key. The key. What key? I looked at the insurance policy again, this time, reading more carefully. The beneficiary was listed as Lucille Hargrove, wife, not Lucille Hargrove and family, not to be distributed among surviving relatives. Just me. Michael had never mentioned Tom handling the insurance claim. He'd never suggested I couldn't handle my own affairs. And in all our years together, he'd never once said I wasn't good with paperwork. They were lying to me. Michael's own family was lying to me about what he'd wanted, about what I was capable of, about what I deserved. The vultures had circled, but they'd made one mistake. They'd assumed I was too weak and too stupid to fight back. That night, I pulled out our wedding album for the first time in years. The leather binding was cracked with age, and the pages stuck together from humidity and time. But there we were, Michael and me, on June 10, 1967, standing outside St. Mary's Catholic Church, in his navy suit and my mother's altered wedding dress. I traced his face in the photograph with my finger. He was 23 then, impossibly young, with thick dark hair and bright eyes full of hope. But looking at him now, with everything that had happened, I saw something I'd missed before. Even then, even on our wedding day, there was something guarded in his expression, a distance that I'd mistaken for romantic mystery. We'd met 2 years earlier at a church social. I was 19, working as a secretary at a law firm, living with my parents and saving money for my own apartment. Michael was new to the neighborhood, having just moved from Boston for work. He was older, more sophisticated than the boys I'd dated in high school. When he asked me to dance, I felt chosen. Our courtship was proper, traditional. Sunday dinners, with my parents, evening walks through the park, movies on Saturday nights. He was attentive but never overwhelming, respectful but not distant. The perfect gentleman, my mother had said. A good catch, but even then, there were things that didn't quite add up. He said he worked in insurance, but his hours were irregular. Sometimes he'd disappear for days at a time, claiming he was investigating claims in other cities. When he returned, he'd be tired, distracted, reluctant to talk about where he'd been. How was Pittsburgh? I'd ask, and he'd give me vague answers about paperwork and difficult clients. Boston was cold, he'd say after another trip, glad to be home. I accepted these explanations because I loved him, because I wanted to believe them, because questioning them felt like a betrayal of trust. Young women in 1965 didn't interrogate their boyfriends about work. We were taught to be supportive, understanding, patient. Looking back now, I realized how little I'd actually known about his job. He'd never brought work home, never mentioned specific cases or colleagues by name. When I'd suggested visiting his office, he'd always found reasons to decline. It's just a boring office, he'd say, nothing you'd find interesting. After we married, the pattern continued. Michael would leave for work each morning and return each evening. But the space between felt like a mystery I wasn't invited to solve. He provided for us, paid our bills, made sure we had everything we needed. Wasn't that enough? I turned the pages of the album, looking at pictures from our honeymoon in Niagara Falls, our first apartment in Brooklyn, holiday gatherings with both our families. Michael smiled in every photo, but it was a careful smile, controlled. Even in our most intimate moments, captured by my camera, he held something back. The children question came up in our 3rd year of marriage. I wanted them desperately, but Michael seemed reluctant. Let's wait, he'd say. Get more established first. My job is stable. I'd argue. We have money saved. It's not about money, Lucy. It's about timing. Timing for what? I'd wondered but never asked. Now I realized he'd been protecting me from something I couldn't understand. A life insurance policy was one thing, but children would have made his secret life infinitely more complicated. We never had children. I'd always assumed it was my fault, some fertility issue we never properly investigated. But maybe Michael had been more careful than I'd realized. Maybe he'd made sure we couldn't have children because he knew his life was dangerous. The phone rang, jarring me from my memories. It was nearly midnight. Hello, Mrs. Hargrove. This is Agent Rodriguez from the FBI. I apologize for calling so late, but I need to speak with you about your husband. My heart stopped. The FBI? Why would the FBI be calling about Michael? I don't understand, I said. Michael was killed in the towers. He was a victim. Yes, ma'am. That's why we need to talk. Can I come by tomorrow morning? Say 10 o'clock. What is this about? I'd rather discuss it in person, if you don't mind. There are some things about your husband's background that we need to clarify. Background? What background? Michael was an insurance adjuster from Boston. What could the FBI possibly want to know about that? Is this about the life insurance? I asked, wondering if Tom and Margaret had been right about complications. Among other things, Agent Rodriguez said, Mrs. Hargrove, I want you to know that nothing we discuss will affect your husband's status as a victim of the September 11th attacks. But there are aspects of his life that may come as a surprise to you. A surprise. After 34 years of marriage, what could possibly surprise me about Michael? I'll be here, I said. After hanging up, I sat in the darkness of our living room, surrounded by wedding photos and memories that suddenly felt false. Michael's coffee cup was still on the counter, and his note was still hidden behind the toaster. Don't trust anyone. Find the key. What key? Why would the FBI be interested in an insurance adjuster who died in a terrorist attack? I went to our bedroom and opened Michael's dresser drawers, looking for something I couldn't name. His clothes smelled like his cologne, aftershave, and something else, something sharp and clean that I'd never noticed before. His socks were rolled perfectly, his shirts folded with military precision. Had he always been so organized? Or was this another thing I'd overlooked? In the bottom drawer, underneath his winter sweaters, I found a small wooden box I'd never seen before. Inside was a collection of items that made no sense. Foreign coins, a small brass key, and a photograph of Michael in military fatigues, standing next to men I didn't recognize. Military fatigues. Michael had never been in the military. He'd told me he'd been in college during Vietnam, that his student deferment had kept him out of the war. But here was proof that he'd lied about that, too. I studied the photograph under the lamp. Michael looked older than 23, more mature than the young man I'd married. His stance was different, more confident and alert. These weren't the movements of an insurance adjuster. These were the movements of a soldier. The brass key felt warm in my palm. It was small, old-fashioned, the kind that might open a safety deposit box or a filing cabinet. Find the key, his note had said. This had to be it. But the key to what? I put everything back in the box and slid it under my side of the bed. Tomorrow, the FBI would come and explain what they knew about my husband. But tonight, I was finally beginning to understand that Michael Hargrove had been a stranger to me from the very beginning. The young man in our wedding photo hadn't been mysterious. He'd been dangerous. And somehow, I'd spent 34 years loving a man who'd never really existed. Agent Rodriguez arrived at exactly 10 o'clock. Accompanied by a younger woman he introduced as Agent Chen. They were both dressed in conservative, dark suits, their badges displayed prominently, their manner professional but not unkind. Mrs. Hargrove, thank you for agreeing to meet with us, Agent Rodriguez said as I showed them to my living room. I know this is a difficult time. Please, sit down, I said, gesturing to the sofa. Can I get you coffee? That would be nice. Thank you. As I prepared the coffee, my hands shook slightly. The brass key was hidden in my bedroom, and Michael's note was still tucked behind the toaster. Should I tell them about these things? What if they already knew about them? Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Chen began when I returned with the tray. We want to start by expressing our condolences. Your husband was indeed a victim of the September 11th attacks, and nothing we discussed today will change that. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But we've discovered that your husband's background was more complicated than it appeared, Agent Rodriguez said. his employment history, his travel patterns, his associations. They paint a picture of a man who is involved in activities beyond insurance adjustment. I set down my coffee cup carefully. What kind of activities? Intelligence work, Agent Chen said. Your husband was a CIA asset, Mrs. Hargrove. He had been for over 30 years. The words hit me like a physical blow. CIA, Michael had been a spy for 30 years. For our entire marriage. That's impossible, I whispered. Michael worked in insurance. He went to the office every day. Yes, he did, Agent Rodriguez confirmed. The insurance company was real, and his work there was legitimate. But it was also his cover. It allowed him to travel, to meet with contacts, to gather intelligence without raising suspicions. Intelligence about what? Initially, Soviet activities during the Cold War. Later, Middle Eastern terrorist organizations. Your husband was particularly valuable because of his language skills and his ability to blend into different environments. Language skills? Michael had occasionally spoken what I'd assumed was Italian when he was frustrated or angry, but now I realized it might have been Arabic, or Russian, or something else entirely. In the months before September 11th, Agent Chen continued, Michael was working on something particularly sensitive. He'd been tracking a cell of individuals who were planning something big. He knew an attack was coming, but he wasn't sure when or where. Are you saying he knew about the World Trade Center? We believe he had pieces of the puzzle, Agent Rodriguez said. That's why he was in the North Tower that morning. He wasn't going to his insurance office. He was meeting with a contact who had information about the timing of the attacks. My mind reeled. Michael had known. He'd known he was walking into danger. And he'd kissed my forehead and left anyway. We found this in his office, Agent Chen said, producing a leather briefcase I recognized. Michael's work briefcase, the one he'd carried every day for years. She opened it to reveal contents that made no sense with my understanding of my husband's life. There were documents in foreign languages, photographs of men in Middle Eastern dress, coded communications, and maps marked with locations I didn't recognize. We think he was trying to prevent the attacks, Agent Rodriguez said. The meeting that morning was supposed to provide him with the final details he needed to alert the authorities. But the attacks happened anyway. Yes, his contact was killed in the first plane, along with your husband. The information died with them. I picked up one of the photographs from the briefcase. It showed Michael sitting in what looked like a Middle Eastern cafe, talking to a man in traditional dress. Michael's body language was relaxed, familiar. This wasn't a stranger he was meeting. This was someone he'd known for a long time. How long has this been going on? I asked. Since 1968, Agent Chen said. He was recruited shortly after your marriage. His background, military service, language, aptitude, his clean personal life made him an ideal candidate. Military service. Michael was never in the military. The agents exchanged glances. Mrs. Hargrove, your husband served 2 tours in Vietnam before you met him. He was Special Forces. When he returned, he was recruited by the CIA and given a new identity. A new identity. Michael Hargrove wasn't his real name, Agent Rodriguez said gently. He was born Michael Kowalski in Detroit. Everything about his Boston background was constructed to give him a clean slate for his work. The room spun around me. My husband's name wasn't even real. Our entire marriage had been built on a lie. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because there are people who might come asking questions, Agent Chen said. People who knew about Michael's work and might think you have information. We need to make sure you're protected. What kind of people? Foreign intelligence services, criminal organizations, people who might want to know what Michael discovered before he died. I thought about Tom and Margaret, about their sudden interest in Michael's insurance policy, about their knowledge of documents I'd never seen. His family, I said. They've been asking about his papers, his insurance policy. They knew things about his work that I didn't. What kind of things? They mentioned international connections, said the insurance company might investigate his associations. They seemed to know more about his travels than I did. Agent Rodriguez made a note in his pad. We'll need to speak with them. In the meantime, Mrs. Hargrove, we need to ask you some questions about your husband's behavior in the weeks before the attacks. He was different, I admitted. Nervous. Distracted. He left a full cup of coffee on the counter that morning, which he never did. Did he leave you anything? Any messages, documents, instructions? I hesitated. Should I tell them about the note, about the key? If Michael had wanted the FBI to know about these things, Wouldn't he have contacted them directly? He left a note, I said finally, hidden behind the toaster. It said not to trust anyone, not even family, and to find the key. What key? I went to the bedroom and retrieved the wooden box, bringing it back to show them. Agent Chen examined the brass key carefully. This looks like it opens a safety deposit box, she said. Did your husband have accounts at banks you didn't know about? I found bank statements for accounts I'd never heard of, I said. There were deposits I couldn't explain. We'll need to see those, Agent Rodriguez said. And we'll need to check the banks in your area to see if this key matches any of their safety deposit boxes. There's something else, I said, showing them the photograph of Michael in military fatigues. I found this in his dresser. He told me he'd never been in the military. Agent Chen studied the photo. This was taken in Vietnam, probably 1967. Your husband was highly decorated. He saved the lives of several men in his unit. Why didn't he tell me? Because his CIA handlers wanted him to have a completely clean identity. Michael Kowalski, the war hero, was too memorable, too easy to trace. Michael Hargrove, the insurance adjuster, was invisible. So everything he told me was a lie. Not everything, Agent Rodriguez said. His feelings for you were real. His commitment to your marriage was real. The work he did protecting his country, trying to prevent attacks like September 11th, that was real too. But I never knew him, I whispered. In 34 years of marriage, I never knew who he really was. He was protecting you, Agent Chen said. The less you knew, the safer you were. But now that he's gone, you need to know enough to protect yourself. From what? From people who might think you have information that could be valuable to them. Your husband's family, for instance, their sudden interest in his papers and insurance policy. That's not normal grief behavior. I thought about Margaret and Tom, about their knowledge of Michael's documents, about their eagerness to control his insurance payout. They knew, I said. They knew about his other life, didn't they? We're going to find out, Agent Rodriguez said. In the meantime, Mrs. Hargrove, I want you to be very careful about what you say to them. Don't mention our visit. Don't talk about what you found in Michael's things. Let them think you're just a grieving widow who doesn't understand complicated financial matters. But I'm not, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. I'm not just a grieving widow. I'm a woman who's spent 34 years loving a man who died trying to save lives. That has to count for something. Agent Chen smiled. It counts for everything, Mrs. Hargrove. Your husband was a hero, and you were his anchor. You gave him a reason to come home safely every day, except for the last day. The day he didn't come home at all. After they left, I sat in my living room surrounded by evidence of Michael's secret life. The briefcase with its foreign documents. The photographs of him in places I'd never imagined. The brass key that might unlock even more secrets. Michael Kowalski. That was his real name. The man I'd married. The man I'd loved. The man I'd buried. Been someone else entirely. But as I looked at our wedding photo again, I realized something had changed. The guarded expression I'd noticed before wasn't mysterious anymore. It was protective. He'd been protecting me from a world I couldn't understand. A life that could have gotten us both killed. The question now was, what else had he been protecting me from? And what would I find when I used that brass key to unlock the rest of his secrets? Margaret arrived the next afternoon with a key to my apartment that I didn't remember giving her. I found her in Michael's study, going through his desk, drawers like she owned the place. Margaret, what are you doing? She looked up without any trace of embarrassment, looking for Michael's important papers. You said you couldn't find his will yesterday, so I thought I'd help. I never said I couldn't find his will. Well, you seemed confused about where he kept things. She held up a small leather journal I'd never seen before. Look what I found tucked behind his filing cabinet. I took the journal from her hands. It was old, worn, with Michael's initials embossed on the cover. But these weren't the initials, MH for Michael Hargrove. They were MK Michael Kowalski, his real name. Where did you get a key to my apartment? I asked. Michael gave it to me years ago. For emergencies. Margaret's smile was tight, predatory. He worried about you being alone so much when he traveled. Michael had never mentioned giving his sister a key. In 34 years, he'd never suggested I needed looking after. What else did he tell you about his travels? Oh, you know Michael. Always working on some big case. Insurance fraud can take you to interesting places. But something in her tone suggested she knew more than she was saying. I opened the journal. The pages were filled with Michael's handwriting, but not in English. The script looked like Arabic, with occasional notes in what might have been Russian. At the back, I found a family tree that made my blood run cold. Michael Kowalski, born Detroit, 1944. Parents, Stefan Kowalski, Anna Kowalski, deceased. Siblings, Margaret Kowalski Morrison, Thomas Kowalski Kowalski. Margaret and Tom weren't Hargroves who had accepted Michael's wife into their family. They were Kowalskis who had known Michael's real identity all along. You knew, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You've always known who he really was. Margaret's facade cracked slightly. I don't know what you're talking about. Michael Kowalski. That was his real name, wasn't it? You're not Margaret Hargrove Morrison. You're Margaret Kowalski Morrison. Lucy, you're not making sense. Grief can make people don't. I held up my hand to stop her. Don't you dare blame this on grief. You've been lying to me for 34 years. Margaret sank into Michael's desk chair, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked old, tired, caught. It wasn't supposed to be forever, she said. When Michael joined the agency, they told us it would be temporary. A few years, maybe 5 at most. We were supposed to pretend we didn't know him, to protect his cover. 34 years. Margaret, you pretended to be strangers to your own brother for 34 years. It wasn't pretending. We stayed in touch. He called us regularly, sent money when Tom was having financial problems, but we couldn't acknowledge the relationship publicly. So when you treated me like an outsider at family gatherings, when you made me feel like I didn't belong, that was part of the cover, she said. But she couldn't meet my eyes. Michael's handlers said his wife couldn't know about his family connections. It was safer for everyone. Safer for whom? Tom appeared in the doorway, his face grim. For all of us. Lucille, do you have any idea what kind of people Michael was dealing with, the kind of enemies he made? How long have you been standing there? Long enough to hear Margaret spill everything. He came into the room and closed the door behind him. We need to talk. We certainly do. I clutched the journal to my chest. Starting with why you're both suddenly so interested in Michael's insurance policy. Tom and Margaret exchanged a look that confirmed my worst suspicions. The insurance money isn't just insurance money, Tom said. Michael was supposed to set up a fund for his CIA contacts, people who helped him over the years. Some of them are in dangerous situations now that he's dead. You're lying. We're not, Margaret said. Michael asked us to make sure the money went to the right people if anything happened to him. He couldn't put it in his will because it would have compromised their identities. Then why didn't he tell me? Because you couldn't handle it, Tom said bluntly. Michael always said you were better off not knowing. He wanted to protect you from his world, so you were going to steal my husband's life insurance and claim it was for his CIA friends. Not steal, Margaret protested. Redistribute, according to Michael's wishes. Where are these wishes written down? Silence. Show me the document where Michael says he wants his life insurance to go to CIA contacts. More silence. You can't, because it doesn't exist. I stood up, amazed at how calm I felt. You've been planning to steal from me since before Michael's body was even recovered. It's not stealing, Tom said. It's family business, and you're not really family, are you? You never knew who Michael really was. You never knew about his work, his sacrifice, his real life. I was his wife. You were his cover story, Margaret said, her voice turning cruel. A convenient prop to make him look normal and suburban. Do you think he would have married you if he hadn't needed a wife for his legend? The words hit me like a slap. Was that true? Had Michael only married me because the CIA needed him to appear settled and domestic? But then I remembered the way he'd looked at me on our wedding day, the way he'd held me during thunderstorms, the way he'd kissed my forehead every morning before leaving for work. Even if our marriage had started as part of his cover, it had become real. Get out, I said. Lucy, Margaret began. Get out of my apartment. Both of you. This isn't over, Tom said. Michael made promises to people who risked their lives for this country. You can't just ignore those obligations. I said get out. After they left, I called the locksmith and had all my locks changed. Then I sat down with Michael's journal and began trying to translate what I could. Most of it was beyond my understanding, but there were phone numbers, addresses, names of people and places, and there was something else. A small piece of paper tucked between the pages, with an address I recognized. It was the address of a bank, 2 blocks from our apartment, with a safety deposit box number written below it. the brass key I'd found in Michael's drawer. It wasn't for some mysterious CIA operation. It was for a safety deposit box at First National Bank, where Michael had probably hidden things he didn't want found in our apartment, bought things his family clearly didn't know about. I looked at the family tree again, at the proof that Margaret and Tom had been lying to me for decades. They'd known Michael's real name, his real background, his real work. They'd known everything while I'd known nothing. But they didn't know about the safety deposit box. And they didn't know that I was beginning to understand exactly how much they'd underestimated me. Michael's real family hadn't been the Kowalskis who shared his blood. His real family had been me, the woman who'd loved him without knowing his secrets, who'd supported him without understanding his work, who'd grieved him without realizing his sacrifice. And I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. With Margaret and Tom's betrayal fresh in my mind, I spent the evening systematically searching every inch of Michael's study. If they had been in here looking for documents, there might be things they'd missed, things that would help me understand what my husband had really been involved in. Michael's filing cabinet was locked, but I found the key taped under his desk drawer. Inside were folders labeled with what looked like case numbers: 1987 NEC-47, 1992, Me 153, 1998 AF22. Each folder contained documents in multiple languages, photographs of men I didn't recognize, and financial records that made my head spin. But it was the folder labeled LH Personal that made my hands shake. LH Lucille Hargrove. He'd kept a file on me. Inside were copies of my birth certificate, social security card, employment records, and medical files. There were photographs of me at work, at the grocery store, talking to neighbors. Pictures I'd never known were being taken. And there was a psychological profile written in clinical, detached language that described my personality, my habits, my weaknesses. Subject shows strong loyalty tendencies and minimal curiosity about spouse's professional activities. Unlikely to investigate discrepancies in cover story. Emotional attachment appears genuine on both sides, which strengthens the operational security of the arrangement. Operational security. I was operational security. But attached to the clinical assessment was a handwritten note in Michael's careful script. Everything in this file is wrong. Lucy is the strongest person I know. She asks few questions because she trusts completely, not because she's incapable of understanding. Her love is the only real thing in my life. If anything happens to me, she'll be fine. She's always been fine. I wiped tears from my eyes and kept searching. In the back of the filing cabinet, I found a metal box containing bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of. First National Bank. Account number 847-291-5583. Monthly statements going back 15 years, showing regular deposits of varying amounts. Some were smaller, few $100s. Others were substantial, $10,000, $20,000, $20,000, once even $50,000. The deposit dates corresponded with Michael's business trips. Every time he'd traveled for insurance work, money had appeared in this secret account. The current balance was $847,000, nearly $1 million. Michael had been hiding nearly $1 million from me. I cross-referenced the deposit dates with my memory of his travels. The $50,000 deposit had come after his trip to Frankfurt in 1999. The $20,000 deposits seemed to follow his visits to London. Smaller amounts came from domestic trips: Chicago, Los Angeles, Miami. These weren't insurance adjustments. These were payments for intelligence work. There was another account at a different bank, Manhattan Savings. Account number 22345678891. This one showed only withdrawals, always in cash, always in amounts under $10,000. The pattern suggested Michael had been careful to avoid triggering federal reporting requirements for large cash transactions. A third account at Brooklyn Community Bank showed a different pattern entirely. Regular automatic deposits of exactly $2,847 every month for the past 20 years. I recognized the amount. It was Michael's monthly salary from the insurance company, minus taxes and our household expenses. He'd been skimming money from our family budget and putting it into this hidden account. The balance was $68,000. $68,000 of our money that should have been going toward our retirement, our future, our life together, hid away where I couldn't access it. I felt sick. Not because of the amount, but because of what it represented. Michael had been planning for a future that didn't include me knowing about it. But there was more. Tucked behind the bank statements was a safety deposit box key different from the brass key I'd found in his dresser. This one was silver, newer, with a number etched into the metal, 2,847, the same number as his monthly deposits to the Brooklyn account. I also found business cards for law firms I'd never heard of, accountants in 3 different states, and what looked like contact information for financial advisors specializing in international asset protection. At the bottom of the box was a manila envelope marked Emergency Protocols. Inside were detailed instructions written in Michael's handwriting. If my cover is blown or if I'm killed in the line of duty, LH should be moved to secure location immediately. Contact Agent Rodriguez at FBI field office. Do not trust local police. Do not trust family members. LH has no knowledge of operational details but may be targeted for information or leverage. Assets and accounts 847-291-5583 and 223-456-7891 are operational funds, not personal wealth. These should be transferred to CIA Financial Division within 72 hours of my death. Account 55567890012. At Brooklyn Community Bank is LH's security fund. She should have full access. A security fund. Michael had been saving money specifically for me, in case something happened to him, but there was no account. 55567890012 in the bank statements I'd found. I checked again, carefully. The Brooklyn Community Bank statements showed account 22345678891, the withdrawal account. Either Michael had made an error in his emergency instructions, or there was another account I hadn't found yet. I looked at the safety deposit box key again, 2,847, the same number as his monthly deposits, and suspiciously close to our anniversary. Date, the 8th of February 47, February 8th, 1947, not our wedding date, but the date we'd first met at that church social. Michael had always been sentimental about that date. He'd said it was when his real life began. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was nearly midnight. Hello, Mrs. Hargrove. This is Agent Rodriguez. I'm sorry to call so late, but we've had a development. What kind of development? We've been monitoring your husband's family members, as we discussed. There's been some unusual activity. Phone calls to numbers we recognize as hostile intelligence contacts. My blood ran cold. What does that mean? It means your brother-in-law and sister-in-law may be more involved in your husband's work than they admitted. We need to meet again, as soon as possible. They were here today, I said. They had a key to my apartment. They were going through Michael's things. Did they take anything? I don't think so. But they knew things about Michael that they shouldn't have known. They knew his real name. His real name, Michael Kowalski. They're not Hargroves, Agent Rodriguez. They're Kowalskis. They've been lying about their relationship to Michael for 34 years. Silence on the other end of the line. Agent Rodriguez, I'm here, Mrs. Hargrove. This changes things significantly. We need to see you first thing in the morning. And, Mrs. Hargrove, yes, don't trust anyone until we get this sorted out. Don't answer your door. Don't take calls from Michael's family. And don't let anyone else into your apartment. Am I in danger? I don't know yet. But your husband left very specific instructions about protecting you, and we're going to follow them. After hanging up, I sat in Michael's study surrounded by evidence of a life I'd never known existed. Bank accounts with hundreds of thousands of dollars, contact information for CIA operatives, emergency protocols for my protection, and a family that had been lying to me since the day I'd met them. But Michael's handwritten note about me being stronger than anyone knew gave me comfort, and the security fund he'd set up specifically for me proved that even in his world of deception and danger, his love for me had been real. Now, I just had to figure out how to survive long enough to claim it. Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen picked me up at 8 the next morning, insisting it wasn't safe for me to go to the bank alone. They'd arranged for FBI security at First National Bank, and I could see unmarked cars positioned around the building as we pulled up. Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Rodriguez said, as we walked toward the entrance, whatever we find in this safety deposit box, I want you to be prepared. Your husband lived in a dangerous world for a very long time. The bank manager, Mr. Patterson, met us at the door. He was nervous, clearly uncomfortable with the FBI presence, but cooperative. Mrs. Hargrove, I'm sorry for your loss. Your husband was a valued customer for many years. How many years? Agent Chen asked. Oh, Since 1978, I believe. He opened the safety deposit box shortly after he opened his checking account with us. Michael had rented this box just 11 years into our marriage, which meant he'd been planning for contingencies almost from the beginning. We followed Mr. Patterson to the vault, where he used his master key while I used the brass key from Michael's dresser. The box was larger than I'd expected, and heavy. We carried it to a private viewing room, where Agent Rodriguez closed the door. "Take your time," Agent Chen said. "We'll examine everything carefully." I lifted the lid with trembling hands. The first thing I saw was money. Stacks of cash in different currencies: dollars, pounds, Deutschmarks, what looked like Russian rubles, more money than I'd ever seen in one place. Underneath the cash was a collection of items that made my heart race. Multiple passports, each with Michael's photograph but different names and nationalities. Michael Thompson, Canadian citizen. Michelle Harbert, French national. Mikhail Volkov, Russian Federation. Each passport was worn, stamped with entry and exit marks from countries around the world. These weren't props, they were documents that had been used repeatedly. "Your husband traveled much more extensively than his insurance work would have required," Agent Rodriguez observed, examining the Canadian passport. "This shows entries into Pakistan, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Syria. He never told me he'd been to those places." "He couldn't," Agent Chen said. "These missions would have been classified at the highest levels." At the bottom of the box was a sophisticated communication device that looked like a cross between a radio and a computer. It was compact, but clearly expensive, with buttons labeled in what appeared to be code. "Encrypted satellite communicator," Agent Rodriguez said. This would have allowed him to contact his handlers from anywhere in the world. But it was the manila envelope marked for Lucy open only after my death that made my hands shake. Inside were 3 letters written in Michael's careful handwriting, each dated differently. The first was dated 1985, 7 years before we'd even talked about retirement planning. "My dearest Lucy," it began, "if you're reading this, then the worst has happened and I'm gone. I know this will be confusing and painful, but I need you to know that everything I've done has been to protect you and our life together." The letter went on to explain his recruitment by the CIA, his real background as Michael Kowalski, and his decision to accept the assignment that would require him to lie to me for the rest of our marriage. "The hardest part isn't the danger or the travel or even the lying," he'd written. "The hardest part is knowing that the woman I love most in the world can never know who I really am. But your love has kept me sane, Lucy. Your trust has kept me human. In a world where everyone lies and nothing is real, you have been my truth." The second letter was dated 1993, 8 years later. "Lucy, if you're reading this, then I've failed in my primary mission, which was to come home to you safely every single day. The work has gotten more dangerous. The people I'm tracking are more sophisticated, more ruthless, but I want you to know that every risk I've taken has been worth it because it was keeping you safe." This letter included more practical information. Bank account numbers, contact information for lawyers, instructions for accessing funds I'd never known existed. "You are financially secure for the rest of your life," he'd written. "The money comes from my government's salary and hazard pay, not from anything illegal. You've earned every penny of it by loving a man who couldn't tell you the truth." The third letter was dated just 6 months ago, March 2001. "Lucy, something big is coming. I can feel it in the intelligence reports, in the chatter we're monitoring, in the way my contacts are behaving. I think there's going to be an attack on American soil, something larger than anything we've seen before." My blood ran cold as I read on. "I've been trying to prevent it, but there are too many moving pieces, too many unknowns. If I don't survive what's coming, I need you to know that I died trying to save lives. I died trying to save you, and everyone, like you, who just want to live normal lives in a safe country. The account information in this box will give you access to everything. But more than that, I need you to know that loving you has been the greatest honor of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. You made me human in a world that was trying to turn me into a machine. Be strong, my love. Be strong and be proud. You were married to a man who spent his life serving his country. But more than that, you were married to a man who loved you more than his own life." I was crying by the time I finished reading, but Agent Chen was focused on the practical details. "Mrs. Hargrove, this communication device is still active," she said, examining the encrypted radio. "There are messages." "What kind of messages?" "Looks like they're from his CIA handler." Recent messages, sent after September 11th. Agent Rodriguez took the device and began working with the controls. After a few minutes, a voice came through the speaker, professional, urgent, speaking in code that I couldn't understand. "That's Agent Morrison," Agent Rodriguez said. "Michael's handler at Langley." "Morrison," I said, "like Margaret Morrison." The agents exchanged glances. "Mrs. Hargrove," Agent Chen said carefully, "what was your sister-in-law's maiden name?" "I don't know. I always assumed it was Hargrove, like Michael. But if Michael's real name was Kowalski, then her maiden name was Kowalski too." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "Agent Rodriguez, is there any chance that Margaret Morrison works for the CIA?" He was already making notes in his pad. "We're going to find out, Mrs. Hargrove. I think your husband's family connections run much deeper than we initially realized." I looked at the money, the passports, the communication device. The letters that proved Michael's love for me had been real, despite all the lies. Everything in this box represented a life I'd never known my husband had lived, but it also represented his final gift to me, the truth, and the means to protect myself from whatever was coming next. "Agent Rodriguez," I said, "I want to hear those messages from Agent Morrison. Are you sure? They might be difficult to listen to. I've been living with difficult truths for the past week. I think I can handle a few more." As Agent Rodriguez worked to decode the messages, I gathered Michael's letters and held them close to my chest. Whatever those messages revealed about his final days, whatever secrets his family was still hiding, I was ready to face them. Michael had spent 34 years protecting me from his world. Now it was time for me to understand that world well enough to protect myself. The first message from Agent Morrison was dated September 12, 2001, the day after Michael died. "Kowalski, if you're receiving this, respond immediately. We've lost contact with Asset Nightingale and need confirmation of mission status. The attack succeeded despite all intelligence indicators. We need to know what went wrong." Asset Nightingale. That was Michael's code name. The second message was more urgent, dated September 15th. "Kowalski, your communication silence is unacceptable. If you've been compromised, activate emergency protocols immediately. Your wife may be at risk. Morrison family assets are standing by for extraction if necessary." Morrison family assets. Margaret wasn't just Michael's sister, she was his CIA contact. Agent Rodriguez looked grim as he played the third message, dated September 20th. "Michael, we've confirmed you were killed in the North Tower. I'm sorry, brother. Your sacrifice wasn't in vain. The intelligence you gathered has helped us identify the entire network. But we have a problem. Someone's been accessing your operational accounts. Someone who knows your real identity and your family connections. Be advised that your wife may be targeted for information. Margaret has been instructed to monitor the situation and protect assets as necessary." My hands were shaking as the full scope of the deception became clear. Margaret hadn't been trying to steal my husband's insurance, money. She'd been trying to protect CIA operational funds from falling into the wrong hands. But she'd been doing it by lying to me, manipulating me, making me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. "Mrs. Hargrove," Agent Chen said gently, "are you all right?" "No," I said, "I'm not all right. My husband's own sister has been treating me like an enemy for 34 years. And now I find out it was all because of some CIA operation." Agent Rodriguez was examining something else from the safety deposit box, a bundle of letters tied with a blue ribbon. "Mrs. Hargrove, there are more letters here. But these aren't from your husband." He handed me the bundle, and my heart stopped when I saw the return address. The letters were from someone named Amira Hassan, with an address in Beirut, Lebanon. They were written in English, but with the careful precision of someone for whom English was a second language. The first letter was dated 1994. "My dearest Michael," it began, "I know the danger in writing to you, but I cannot bear the silence any longer. The mission in Damascus was successful, but I fear we have been discovered. My handler believes I should relocate, but I cannot leave knowing you are still in danger." I felt sick. Michael had been having an affair with another agent, but as I read further, the true nature of their relationship became clearer. "I know you are married, and I respect that your wife must never know about our work together. But in this world of lies and deception, you have been my closest friend, my trusted partner, perhaps the only person who truly understands the sacrifices we make. Partner, not lover partner." The letters continued over several years, describing missions in various Middle Eastern countries. close calls with hostile intelligence services, and the emotional toll of living double lives. I have been thinking about your wife, Amira wrote in a 1997 letter. You speak of her with such love, such reverence. I envy her, not because she has your heart, but because she has your truth. Even though she doesn't know the details of your work, she knows the man you really are. That is a luxury I will never have with anyone. You worry that you are lying to her, she continued, but you are wrong. The man who comes home to her every night, the man who loves her and protects her and builds a life with her that is not a lie. That is the truest thing about you. The final letter was dated August 2001, just weeks before the attacks. Michael, I am frightened. The intelligence we've gathered about the upcoming operation is more serious than anything we've encountered before. My sources suggest the target will be significant, symbolic, designed to cause maximum casualties and terror. I know you have been working to prevent this, but I fear our enemies are too well organized, too committed. If something happens to you, I want your wife to know that you died as a hero. You have saved more lives than she will ever know. I also want her to know that she was your anchor. In our long conversations during difficult missions, you spoke of her constantly. She gave you strength, hope, and a reason to survive. Your love for her made you the best agent I ever worked with. If I survive this and you do not, I will find a way to tell her the truth about your sacrifice. She deserves to know that her husband was one of the finest men I have ever known. I was crying by the time I finished reading, but they weren't tears of betrayal. They were tears of pride and sadness and a strange kind of relief. Michael hadn't been unfaithful. He'd been professional, dedicated, working with other agents who understood the impossible position he was in, and even in that world of secrets and lies, I had been his truth. Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Rodriguez said, there's something else you need to know. We've identified the hostile intelligence contacts that your brother-in-law has been calling. What kind of contacts? Russian intelligence operatives, people who were interested in your husband's work, and maybe trying to gather information about his final mission. You think Tom is working for the Russians? We think Tom may have been compromised, Agent Chen said. Financial records show he's been in serious debt for several years. He may have been recruited, or he may simply be desperate enough to sell information. The pieces were falling into place. Tom's eagerness to get control of Michael's insurance money, his knowledge of documents I'd never seen, his sister's cooperation in manipulating MIT, all made sense if Tom was working for foreign intelligence. What about Margaret? I asked. Margaret appears to be legitimate CIA agent, Rodriguez said, but her methods of protecting you and the operational assets have been questionable. She should have identified herself to you immediately after Michael's death. So she really was trying to protect me. In her way, yes, but she was also protecting CIA interests, and sometimes those priorities conflict. I thought about Margaret's cruel words the day before, about how I was just a cover story. How Michael only married me because his legend required a wife. Even if she was CIA'd, even if she was trying to protect me, her methods had been unnecessarily hurtful. I want to confront her, I said. Mrs. Hargrove, that might not be safe. Agent Rodriguez, my husband spent 34 years lying to me to protect me. His sister has spent 34 years treating me like an enemy to protect me. I'm tired of being protected by people who think I'm too weak to handle the truth. I gathered Michael's letters, Amira's letters, and the evidence from the safety deposit box. I want to face Margaret Morrison and ask her exactly what she thinks she's been protecting me from. And I want to do it with you present, so she can't lie to me anymore. Agent Chen smiled. Mrs. Hargrove, I think your husband was right about you being stronger than anyone realized. He was right about a lot of things, I said. Now it's time for me to prove it. We arranged to meet Margaret at her house in Westchester, with FBI backup positioned discreetly around the neighborhood. Agent Rodriguez insisted on wearing a wire, and I agreed to one as well. Whatever happened in this confrontation, there would be a record of it. Margaret answered the door with the same false smile she'd worn for 34 years. Lucy, this is unexpected, and you've brought friends. FBI Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen, I said, showing my way past her into the living room. We need to talk, Margaret. Or should I say Agent Morrison? Her composure cracked immediately. I don't know what you're talking about. Your CIA handler has been sending messages to Michael's communication device, Agent Rodriguez said. Messages addressed to Morrison family assets. Messages about protecting operational funds and extracting my wife if necessary. Margaret sank into her chair, suddenly looking every one of her 70 years. How much do you know? I know you're CIA. I know you've been lying to me about your relationship to Michael for our entire marriage. I know Tom has been making calls to Russian intelligence contacts. I sat down across from her, my hands folded calmly in my lap. What I don't know is why you thought treating me like an enemy was the best way to protect me. You don't understand the world your husband lived in, Margaret said. The kind of people who would kill you just to send a message to him, the kind of information that could get you tortured for weeks before they finally let you die. So you decided I was better off thinking you hated me. I decided you were better off not knowing anything that could be used against you, Margaret snapped. Michael agreed. We all agreed. The less you knew, the safer you were. Agent Chen leaned forward. But Mrs. Hargrove wasn't safe, was she? Because Tom compromised the operational security. Margaret's face went white. What are you talking about? Your brother has been in contact with Russian intelligence operatives, Agent Rodriguez said. We have recordings of phone calls, financial records showing payments into his accounts. He's been selling information about Michael's missions. That's impossible, Margaret whispered. Tom doesn't know anything about Michael's missions. He knows enough, I said, pulling out the military service records I'd found in Michael's study. He knows about Michael's real background, his Vietnam service, his special forces training, his recruitment by the CIA, and he knows about the operational accounts. I spread the documents across Margaret's coffee table. Her own handwriting was on some of them, notes about mission timelines, contact protocols, emergency procedures. You gave Tom access to classified information, Agent Rodriguez said. Information he's been selling to pay off his gambling debts. I never, Margaret began, then stopped. Her face crumpled as the reality hit her. Oh God, the family meetings, the documents I showed him to explain why we had to keep the secret. I thought I was protecting the operation. You were protecting yourself, I said, surprised by the steel in my own voice. You were protecting your career, your reputation, your position in the agency. But you weren't protecting Michael, and you certainly weren't protecting me. That's not true, Margaret protested. Everything I did was to keep you safe. Keeping me safe would have been telling me the truth after Michael died, I said. Keeping me safe would have been identifying yourself as CIA and explaining the real situation. Instead, you let me think my husband's family hated me, while you manipulated me into giving up his insurance money. The insurance money isn't yours, Margaret said desperately. It's operational funds. Michael was supposed to use it to pay his contacts, to maintain his cover. Michael left specific instructions. Agent Chen interrupted. We found them in his safety deposit box. The operational accounts go back to the CIA, but the insurance policy belongs to his wife. I pulled out Michael's handwritten emergency protocols. He was very clear about this, Margaret. The insurance policy was my security fund, money he'd been setting aside specifically to take care of me if something happened to him. Margaret read the document, her hands shaking. I didn't know, she whispered. His handler told me all the accounts were operational. I thought you were trying to steal money that belonged to the agency. So you decided to steal it first. I was trying to protect it, Margaret said. But even she seemed to realize how weak that sounded. From whom? From me. The woman who loved your brother for 34 years without knowing who he really was. The woman who supported him through every business trip, every long absence, every mysterious phone call. You don't understand, Margaret said again, but with less conviction. I understand that you never gave me a chance to prove I could handle the truth, I said. I understand that you've spent 34 years treating me like I was too stupid and too weak to be trusted with my own husband's secrets. That's not. It is exactly that. I stood up, amazed at how calm I felt. And the worst part is that you were wrong about everything. You were wrong about Tom. He's the one who compromised the operation. You were wrong about the insurance money. It was never operational funds. And you were wrong about me. Agent Rodriguez was taking notes throughout our conversation. Mrs. Morrison, we're going to need you to come in for debriefing. There's been a serious breach of operational security, and we need to understand how extensive the compromise has been. What about Tom? Margaret asked. Tom is already in custody, Agent Chen said. We arrested him this morning. The financial evidence is overwhelming. Margaret looked older than I'd ever seen her, defeated and confused. I was trying to protect the family, she said weakly. Michael was your family, I said. I was your family. The people Tom sold information to, they're the enemy. And you let the enemy win because you were too proud to trust the people who actually loved your brother. Lucy, I'm sorry, Margaret said, and for the first time in 34 years, she sounded sincere. I thought I was doing the right thing. The right thing would have been telling me the truth the day after Michael died. I said, the right thing would have been trusting me to handle the knowledge that my husband was a hero. I gathered the documents from her coffee table and put them back in my purse. The right thing would have been remembering that I was his wife, not his enemy. As we left Margaret's house, Agent Rodriguez put a hand on my shoulder. Mrs. Hargrove, you handled that very well. I'm learning, I said. Michael always said I was stronger than people realized. I'm starting to believe him. But even as we drove away, I couldn't shake the sadness of it all. Margaret had spent decades in the intelligence world, trained to spot deception and evaluate threats, but she'd completely missed the real danger: her own brother's betrayal. While treating me like the enemy, Michael had trusted me enough to marry me, to build a life with me, to love me for 34 years. It was time I trusted myself enough to claim the life he'd died protecting. The next morning, Agent Rodriguez called with news that chilled me to the bone. Mrs. Hargrove, we need you to come to our field office immediately. We've uncovered something in Tom's communications that directly relates to your husband's death. At the FBI building, they led me to a secure conference room where surveillance photos were spread across a large table. My legs went weak when I recognized Michael in several of them. These photographs were taken in the weeks leading up to September 11th, Agent Chen explained. They show your husband meeting with individuals we now know were connected to the attack. The first photo showed Michael sitting in a coffee shop with a man in a business suit. Both men looked tense, focused. The second photo captured them walking together near the World Trade Center, Michael pointing up at the towers. Who is that man? I asked. His name was Ahmad Hassano, relation to Amira Hassan, the agent whose letters you found. Ahmad was one of the coordinators of the September 11th attacks. My world tilted, just saying Michael was meeting with the terrorists. We believe Michael was trying to prevent the attacks, Agent Rodriguez said quickly. But the situation was more complicated than we initially understood. He showed me another photograph, this one, taken inside what looked like a hotel room. Michael was sitting across from Ahmad Hassan, and between them on the table were documents and what appeared to be money. This photo was taken 3 days before the attacks, Agent Chen said. According to the intelligence we've gathered from Tom's Russian contacts, Ahmad Hassan believed he was recruiting your husband as an asset. Recruiting him for what? To provide inside information about CIA operations targeting their network. Ahmad thought Michael was a disgruntled agent who could be turned. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a transcript of recorded conversations. We've been able to decrypt some of the communications between Ahmad and his handlers. They believed they had successfully compromised a high-level CIA operative. I stared at the surveillance photos, trying to process what this meant. But Michael wasn't really helping them. No. Michael was feeding them false information while gathering intelligence about their plans. But it was an incredibly dangerous game. If they had discovered his deception, they would have killed him. I finished. They would have done worse than kill him, Agent Chen said grimly. And they would have come after you to send a message to other potential double agents. Another photo showed Michael entering the North Tower on the morning of September 11th. The timestamp read, 8:15 a.m. He was there early, I said, earlier than usual. He was supposed to meet Ahmad Hassan at 8:45 a.m., Agent Rodriguez explained. Michael had convinced Hassan that he had critical information about CIA operations that needed to be shared immediately. What information? False intelligence designed to disrupt their final preparations. Michael was hoping to delay the attacks long enough for FBI teams to locate and arrest the remaining cell members. Agent Chen showed me the final photograph in the sequence: Michael and Ahmad Hassan in the lobby of the North Tower, both men checking their watches. The timestamp read, 8:44 a.m. This was taken 2 minutes before the first plane hit, she said softly. I touched the photograph, tracing Michael's face with my finger. He looked calm, determined, a man who knew he was walking into danger but was doing it anyway. The plane that hit the North Tower struck the 95th floor, Agent Rodriguez continued. Ahmad Hassan's meeting room was on the 97th floor. Michael was heading there when the plane hit, so they both died. Yes, but not before Michael transmitted a final message to his CIA handler. Agent Chen activated a recording device. Michael's voice filled the room, distorted by static but unmistakably his. This is Nightingale. The bird has flown. Repeat, the bird has flown. Hassan's network is compromised but operational. Secondary targets include the Pentagon and possibly the Capitol. I'm trapped in the North Tower. Tell Lucy the transmission ended in static and the terrible sound of structural collapse. I was crying, but they were tears of pride mixed with grief. Michael had died trying to save lives, trying to warn the authorities about additional targets. He'd died a hero. Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Rodriguez said gently, "There's more you need to know. The Russian intelligence service had been tracking your husband's operation through the information Tom was selling them." "What kind of information?" "Mission timelines, contact protocols, operational methods. Enough information for them to warn Ahmad Hassan that Michael might be attempting to infiltrate their network." The implications hit me like a physical blow. "You're saying Tom's betrayal put Michael in danger?" "We believe Tom's information may have made Ahmad Hassan suspicious of your husband's motives. That's why Hassan moved the meeting location to the World Trade Center instead of a more secure site. He may have been planning to kill Michael regardless of what information he provided." Agent Chen spread out financial records, showing payments from Russian accounts to Tom's personal banking. "The final payment to your brother-in-law was made on September 10th, the day before the attacks." "How much?" $50,000. Payment for what the Russians called actionable intelligence regarding Nightingale operations. I stared at the evidence, feeling sick. Tom had sold his own brother's life for $50,000. "Does Margaret know about this?" I asked. "Margaret is cooperating fully with our investigation," Agent Rodriguez said. "She's as shocked as you are. Her operational security protocols never included Tom in classified briefings. She thought she was just explaining family history to him, but she gave him enough information to piece together Michael's real work." "Unfortunately, yes. And Tom was smart enough to realize that information had value to the right buyers." I thought about Michael's final message, cut short by the collapse of the tower. "Tell Lucy." He'd started to say, "Tell me what," Agent Rodriguez, in Michael's final transmission. He was trying to tell me something. "Do you have any idea what it might have been?" He consulted his notes. "Based on the other materials we found, our analysts believe he was going to tell you he loved you. His letters in the safety deposit box all emphasized how much you meant to him. Or he might have been trying to give you final instructions," Agent Chen added. "Something about the accounts, or the house, or how to contact his CIA handlers. But I had a different theory. I thought Michael was trying to tell me that I was stronger than anyone realized, that I could handle the truth about his life and his death, that I could survive whatever came next." Looking at these surveillance photos, seeing the evidence of my husband's courage and my brother-in-law's betrayal, I realized Michael had been right about me all along. I was strong enough to handle the truth, and I was strong enough to make sure Tom paid for what he'd done. 3 days later, I received a call from Consolidated Life Insurance Company that I'd been dreading. "Mr. Williams, the claims investigator, had questions about Michael's policy that went far beyond standard procedures. Mrs. Hargrove, I'm afraid we've encountered some irregularities in your husband's file that require further investigation before we can process your claim." "What kind of irregularities?" "Perhaps we could meet in person to discuss this. There are some sensitive matters that are better handled face-to-face." I arranged to meet him at his Manhattan office, bringing Agent Rodriguez with me for support. The insurance company's building was a imposing glass tower, and Mr. Williams' office was decorated with the kind of expensive furniture that suggested they paid their executives well while fighting every claim. Williams was a thin, nervous man in his 50s who kept consulting a thick file folder while avoiding direct eye contact with me. "Mrs. Hargrove, I want to begin by expressing our sympathies for your loss. The September 11th attacks were a tragedy that affected us all. Thank you. Now, what's the problem with Michael's policy?" Williams opened his file and spread several documents across his desk. I recognized some of them. They were copies of the same papers Tom and Margaret had shown me weeks earlier. "The problem, Mrs. Hargrove, is that your husband's employment history doesn't match the information he provided when he applied for this policy." "What do you mean?" "According to the application he filed in 1985, Michael Hargrove was an insurance adjuster who had been employed by Meridian Insurance for 10 years. But when we contacted Meridian to verify his employment, we discovered some discrepancies." Agent Rodriguez leaned forward. "What kind of discrepancies?" Meridian Insurance confirms that a Michael Hargrove worked for them, but their records show significant gaps in his employment, extended leaves of absence, unexplained travel expenses, and salary payments that don't match his supposed position. Williams pulled out another document, an internal memo from Consolidated Life's investigative department. Furthermore, we've been contacted by federal authorities about your husband's background. Apparently, Michael Hargrove wasn't his real name. You've been talking to the FBI? I asked. Among others, Mrs. Hargrove, when someone applies for life insurance under a false identity, it typically voids the policy regardless of how the premiums were paid. My heart sank. This was exactly what Margaret and Tom had been afraid of, the insurance company finding reasons to deny the claim. However, Williams continued, we've also been contacted by representatives from the Central Intelligence Agency who have provided documentation that complicates matters significantly. He produced a letter on official CIA letterhead, signed by someone identified as Deputy Director Sarah Chun, the same Agent Chen I'd been working with, though I hadn't known her actual rank. According to this letter, your husband was operating under an official government identity as part of a classified intelligence operation. The CIA is requesting that we honor the policy as written, regardless of the identity discrepancies. So, what's the problem? Agent Rodriguez asked. The problem is the policy's terrorism clause, Williams said, pointing to a section of fine print I'd never noticed before. Life insurance policies typically exclude payouts for deaths resulting from terrorist activities if the insured was involved in those activities. I felt the room spin around me. Involved in what activities? Mrs. Hargrove, we've been provided with evidence that your husband was meeting with known terrorists in the days before the attacks. Surveillance photographs show him in direct contact with individuals who were later identified as coordinators of the September 11th operation. Williams showed me copies of the same photos Agent Rodriguez had shown me at the FBI office. Michael meeting with Ahmad Hassan, walking near the World Trade Center, sitting in hotel rooms with men who were planning mass murder. These photographs suggest that your husband may have been collaborating with the attackers rather than attempting to prevent the attacks. That's not true, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. Michael was working undercover to stop the attacks. Do you have documentation to support that claim? I looked at Agent Rodriguez, who nodded slightly. We'd discussed this possibility and prepared for it. Mr. Williams, I have a letter from my husband explaining his activities, as well as communications with his CIA handlers that confirm he was working to prevent the attacks, not facilitate them. May I see these documents? Agent Rodriguez produced copies of Michael's letters from the safety deposit box and transcripts of his final communication to CIA headquarters. Williams read them carefully, occasionally making notes in the margins. His expression grew more troubled as he worked through the materials. Mrs. Hargrove, these documents do support your claim that your husband was working against the terrorists, but they also confirm that he was engaged in extremely dangerous intelligence work that ultimately led to his death. What are you saying? I'm saying that your husband's death was directly related to his intelligence activities. He died because he was a CIA operative, not because he was an innocent victim who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Williams pulled out another section of the insurance policy. Our terrorism clause specifically excludes coverage for individuals who die as a result of intelligence operations, regardless of which side they were working for. You're going to deny the claim? I asked. I'm saying we have grounds to deny the claim based on the terrorism clause and the false identity issue. I felt Margaret and Tom's fears becoming reality. The insurance company was going to use Michael's CIA work as an excuse to avoid paying the policy. However, Williams continued, there's been another development that changes our position significantly. He produced another official document, this one from the U.S. Department of Justice. Yesterday, we received a notification that your brother-in-law, Thomas Kowalski, has been arrested on charges of espionage and conspiracy. The evidence suggests that he provided information to foreign intelligence services that may have contributed to your husband's death. How does that affect the insurance claim? If Thomas Kowalski's actions led to your husband's death, then your husband wasn't killed because of his intelligence work, he was killed because of his brother's betrayal. That would make him a victim of espionage, not a casualty of intelligence operations. Agent Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. So you're saying the policy would be payable? I'm saying we're prepared to offer a settlement, Williams said. $500,000, plus interest and penalties for the delay in processing. In exchange, you would agree not to pursue additional claims or legal action against the company. It was the full amount of the policy, plus extra money for their delay. But something in William's manner suggested there was more to this offer than simple fairness. "Why are you being so generous?" I asked. Williams looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Hargrove, Consolidated Life Insurance, has been the carrier for several CIA operatives over the years. We have a business relationship with the agency that we value highly. When the CIA specifically requests that we honor a policy, we take that request very seriously. You're paying the claim because the CIA told you to. We're paying the claim because it's the right thing to do," Williams said, but his tone suggested that righteousness and government pressure weren't mutually exclusive. "I'll need to think about this," I said. "Of course. But Mrs. Hargrove, I should mention that this offer is contingent on your agreement to keep the details of your husband's work confidential. The CIA has requested that you sign a non-disclosure agreement as part of the settlement. A non-disclosure agreement. They wanted to pay me to stay quiet about Michael's heroism, about Tom's betrayal, about the insurance company's initial attempt to deny the claim. I'll get back to you," I said. As we left the insurance building, Agent Rodriguez put his hand on my shoulder. "Mrs. Hargrove, that's a good offer. 500,000 plus penalties. That's probably more than you'd get if you fought them in court." "It's not about the money," I said. "It's about the truth. They want to pay me to keep quiet about what really happened to Michael. Sometimes keeping quiet is the best way to honor his memory, but I wasn't sure about that. Michael had spent his life keeping quiet about his work, his sacrifice, his heroism. Maybe it was time for someone to tell the truth about what he'd really done. Maybe it was time for me to decide whether honoring his memory meant protecting his secrets or sharing his story. That evening, I received an unexpected phone call from someone who identified himself as David Chen, Agent Chen's brother, and a former colleague of Michael's at Meridian Insurance. "Mrs. Hargrove, I hope you don't mind me calling. Sergeant Chen told me about your situation with the insurance company. I wanted to speak with you about your husband. You knew Michael. I worked with him for 15 years. I was his supervisor at Meridian, though I only learned about his real job after September 11th. We arranged to meet the next day at a quiet diner in Queens, away from Manhattan and the FBI offices. David Chen was a soft-spoken man in his 60s who carried himself with the careful precision of someone who'd spent years keeping secrets. "Mrs. Hargrove, I want you to know that your husband was one of the finest men I've ever worked with," he said as we settled into a corner booth. Even though I didn't know about his CIA work, I could tell he was special. "How so?" "He cared about people in a way that most insurance adjusters don't. When he investigated claims, he wasn't looking for reasons to deny coverage. He was looking for ways to help families get through difficult times." David pulled out a small leather diary from his jacket pocket. "I kept a daily log of office activities for years. It was a habit from my military service. When I learned about Michael's real work, I went back through these logs to see if I could understand what I'd missed." He opened the diary to a page marked with a yellow sticky note. "This entry is from August 2001, about 3 weeks before the attacks, August 15, 2001, he read aloud. "Michael seemed extremely agitated today. He made several phone calls from his office, speaking in what sounded like Arabic. When I asked if everything was all right, he said he was working on a case involving international insurance fraud. He seemed worried about something, but wouldn't discuss details." August 20, 2001. Michael requested emergency vacation time, claiming a family situation. He's never taken unscheduled time off in 15 years. Something serious is happening. August 30, 2001. Michael returned to work but seemed distracted. He spent most of his time on the phone or reviewing files that weren't related to any of his current cases. When I offered to help with his workload, he declined and said he needed to handle things personally. David looked up from the diary. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I realize Michael was preparing for something. He was trying to balance his cover job with whatever operation he was working on. "Did he ever mention me?" "All the time. Michael talked about you constantly, how proud he was of your strength, how much he missed you when he traveled, how he looked forward to retirement so he could spend more time with you." David flipped to another marked page. September 7, 2001. Michael asked me about the company's life insurance policies for employees. He wanted to make sure his beneficiary information was up to date and that you would have no trouble accessing the benefits if something happened to him. I thought it was an odd conversation, but now I understand he was preparing for the possibility that he might not survive his mission. He knew he was in danger. I think he knew the risks were increasing. Look at this entry. September 10th, 2001. Michael worked late, later than I've ever seen him stay. When I asked if he needed help finishing something, he said he was writing letters, personal correspondence. He said, he seemed sad but determined. He shook my hand when I left and thanked me for being a good friend. It felt like goodbye. The letters. Michael had been writing his final letters to me the night before he died. David, what did you think of Michael as a person? Not as an agent or an insurance adjuster, but as a man. He was the most ethical person I've ever met, David said without hesitation. In 15 years, I never saw him cut corners, never saw him treat anyone unfairly, never saw him put his own interests ahead of doing the right thing, even though he was lying about who he was. Mrs. Hargrove, Michael never lied about the important things. He never lied about his character, his values, or his commitment to helping people. The only thing he lied about was his name and his background, and he did that to protect you and to serve his country. David reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box, similar to the one I'd found in Michael's dresser. After Michael died, I cleaned out his desk at Meridian. I found this hidden in a locked drawer. I've been wondering what to do with it ever since Sarah told me you were Michael's widow. Inside the box was a collection of photographs, pictures of me that I'd never known were taken. Me at the grocery store, walking in the park, talking to neighbors, working in our garden. But these weren't surveillance photos like the ones the FBI had shown me. These were taken with love, with attention to detail that showed how carefully Michael had been watching over me. He kept these at work, I asked. In his desk drawer, where he could look at them when he was having a difficult day. Sometimes I'd see him studying them during lunch breaks, especially when he'd just returned from a business trip. There was also a small notebook filled with Michael's handwriting. Not intelligence reports or operational notes, but personal observations about our life together. Lucy smiled today when I brought her flowers for no reason. I need to remember to do small things like this more often. Lucy asked about my work again. I hate that I can't tell her the truth, but I love that she cares enough to ask. Lucy has been reading about retirement planning. She talks about the places we'll travel, the things we'll do when I'm not working so much. I hope I live long enough to give her that life. I was crying by the time I finished reading, but they were good tears. This notebook proved that Michael had thought about me constantly, that he'd been planning a future with me, that I'd been the center of his emotional life, even while he was living a dangerous double existence. Mrs. Hargrove, David said gently, I want you to know that Michael's colleagues at Meridian all respected him enormously. When we learned about his real work, it explained so much about his character, his attention to detail, his ability to remain calm under pressure, his commitment to helping people. Did any of you suspect? Not suspect, exactly. But we knew he was different. More capable than a typical insurance adjuster, more worldly, more confident in crisis situations. We just thought he was exceptional at his job. Because he was exceptional at his job, I said. Both jobs. David smiled. Exactly. And Mrs. Hargrove, I want you to know that if you ever need anything help understanding his work benefits, someone to talk to about what he was really like, anything at all, please call me. He handed me his business card along with the wooden. Bafta was my friend for 15 years. That makes you family. As we parted ways, I realized something important had changed. For weeks, I'd been surrounded by people who wanted to protect me, manipulate me, or use me for their own purposes. But David Chen had given me something different, genuine friendship and respect for both Michael and me. Michael had been surrounded by people who understood his value, who appreciated his sacrifice, who considered him family. The CIA might want me to sign non-disclosure agreements. The insurance company might want to pay me to stay quiet, and Michael's blood relatives might want to steal from me, but Michael's real family, the people who'd worked with him and cared about him, they wanted to make sure I knew the truth about what a remarkable man I'd been married to, and that truth was worth more than any amount of money or institutional protection. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Agent Rodriguez called me at 7 in the morning, his voice tight with excitement and something that sounded like relief. Mrs. Hargrove, we need you to come to the field office immediately. We've found something that changes everything we thought we knew about your husband's final mission. When I arrived at the FBI building, I was led to a technical analysis room filled with computers and audio equipment. Agent Chen was there, along with several technicians I didn't recognize. Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Chen said, "Do you remember your husband's final communication from the North Tower? The message that was cut off when the building collapsed? He said something about the bird flying and Hassan's network being compromised. And he started to say something to me. That's what we thought. But yesterday, our audio technicians discovered something remarkable." One of the technicians, a young woman named Dr. Martinez, gestured to a complex array of equipment. "We've been working with enhanced audio recovery techniques, trying to extract additional information from damaged communications. When we applied these techniques to your husband's final transmission, we found that there was more to the message than we initially realized." "What kind of more?" "The transmission didn't end when the building started to collapse," Dr. Martinez explained. "It continued for several more seconds. But the audio was so distorted by structural damage and interference that we couldn't understand it until now." She activated a playback system, and Michael's voice filled the room. But this time, I could hear parts of the message that had been lost before. "This is Nightingale. The bird has flown. Repeat, the bird has flown. Hassan's network is compromised but operational. Secondary targets include the Pentagon and possibly the Capitol. I'm trapped in the North Tower. Tell Lucy then." Instead of static, there was a pause, followed by more of Michael's voice, speaking more quietly but with urgent determination. "Tell Lucy that the device is in the conference room safe. Hassan was planning a third wave planes targeting nuclear facilities. The codes are in his briefcase. I've locked down the room but can't get out. The building is." The transmission ended in the terrible sound of collapse, but the additional information was staggering. "Device?" I asked. "What device?" Agent Rodriguez consulted his notes. "We think your husband found something in Ahmad Hassan's briefcase, intelligence about additional attacks that were planned beyond the World Trade Center and Pentagon. A third wave of attacks, according to Michael's message. Yes, planes targeting nuclear facilities. If that had succeeded," Agent Chun completed the thought, "it would have been exponentially worse than what actually happened." Dr. Martinez pulled up a computer reconstruction of the North Tower's 97th floor. "Based on your husband's final message, we believe he discovered Hassan's plans and managed to secure critical intelligence about the extended operation, but the building collapsed. How could anyone recover anything from the 97th floor?" "That's what we thought initially," Agent Rodriguez said, "but then we found this." He showed me a photograph of a fire-resistant safe, damaged but intact, sitting in a recovery warehouse. This safe was found in the World Trade Center debris 3 weeks after the attacks. It was catalogued as unidentified recovery material and stored in a federal facility. Yesterday, based on your husband's final message, we located it and had it opened. What was inside? Agent Chen produced a sealed evidence bag containing a leather briefcase that looked like it had been through hell but was still recognizable. Ahmad Hassan's briefcase. Your husband managed to secure it in the conference room safe before the building collapsed. They opened the briefcase carefully. Inside were documents in Arabic, detailed maps of nuclear facilities across the United States, flight training materials, and a list of names that made my blood run cold. These documents detail plans for a second round of attacks, Agent Rodriguez explained. 20 additional operatives, targeting nuclear power plants in 6 different states. The attacks were supposed to happen in November 2001. Your husband's action in securing this intelligence allowed us to identify and arrest the entire network, Agent Chen said. Because of what he did in those final moments, we were able to prevent attacks that could have killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. I stared at the evidence, trying to process the magnitude of what Michael had accomplished. In his final moments, trapped in a collapsing building, he'd managed to secure intelligence that saved countless lives. "There's more," Dr. Martinez said. "We found this device in the briefcase." She showed me what looked like a sophisticated communication system, similar to the one we'd found in Michael's safety deposit box, but more advanced. This device contains encrypted communications between Hassan's network and their handlers overseas. The intelligence value is extraordinary. It's given us insight into terrorist operations around the world. But the most important discovery, Agent Rodriguez said, is this. He handed me a manila envelope that had been sealed inside the briefcase. On the outside, in Michael's handwriting, were the words, For Lucy, final message. Inside was a letter written on hotel stationery, dated September 11th, 2001, 8:30 a.m. My dearest Lucy, it began. If you're reading this, then I didn't make it out of this meeting alive, but I need you to know that everything I've done today has been to protect you and protect our country. I've discovered that the attacks planned for today are just the beginning. Hassan's network has prepared for a second wave that would be far more devastating than anything we imagined. I've managed to secure their communications and planning documents, but I don't know if I'll survive long enough to get this information. To my handlers, the safe combination is our anniversary date, the 10th of June, 67. If something happens to me, make sure the FBI finds this briefcase. The information inside could save hundreds of thousands of lives. Lucy, I want you to know that every day of our marriage has been the greatest gift of my life. You gave me a reason to fight for something good, something pure, something worth protecting. When I think about what these terrorists want to destroy, I think about your kindness, your trust, your love. You represent everything that makes America worth defending. Be proud of what I've done today. Be proud of our life together. And know that my last thought will be of you. I was sobbing by the time I finished reading, but Agent Chen's voice was gentle when she spoke. Mrs. Hargrove, your husband didn't just die as a victim of the September 11th attacks. He died as a hero who prevented even greater tragedies. The intelligence he secured that day has led to the disruption of terrorist networks around the world. How many people? I asked through my tears. How many people? What? How many people did Michael save? Agent Rodriguez consulted a classified briefing document based on the targets listed in Hassan's plans. We estimate that your husband's actions prevented the deaths of at least 200,000 Americans, 200,000 people. Michael had died saving 200,000 lives. Mrs. Hargrove, Agent Chen said, the President of the United States wants to posthumously award your husband the Medal of Honor, but because of the classified nature of his work, the ceremony would have to be private. What about the insurance company? I asked. What about their terrorism clause? The insurance company has been briefed on these findings, Agent Rodriguez said. They're prepared to pay the full policy amount plus additional compensation for your husband's heroic service. And Tom? What about Tom's betrayal? Tom's information to the Russians actually helped us, inadvertently, Agent Chen explained. The Russians shared some of that intelligence with us through back channels after the attacks. They were as shocked as anyone by the scale of the terrorist operation. I looked at Michael's final letter again, at his words about being proud of what he'd done. For 34 years, I'd been proud to be married to a good man. Now I learned I'd been married to a hero who died saving countless lives. Agent Rodriguez, I said, I want to accept the Medal of Honor ceremony, and I want to make sure everyone knows what Michael really did. The CIA would prefer. I don't care what the CIA prefers, I said, surprised by the strength in my own voice. Michael spent his life keeping secrets to protect people. Now it's time for people to know what he sacrificed to protect them. Agent Chen smiled. Mrs. Hargrove, I think your husband would be very proud of you. He'd be proud of both of us, I said. We both served our country. He did it in secret, and I did it by loving him enough to let him go every day without knowing if he'd come home safely. For the first time since September 11th, I felt peace. Michael hadn't just died. He'd died accomplishing something extraordinary, and I hadn't just lost a husband. I'd been married to one of the greatest heroes in American history. Armed with the truth about Michael's heroism and the documentation of his extraordinary sacrifice, I decided it was time to take control of my own situation. I hired the best attorney in Manhattan, Rebecca Patterson, a woman known for her expertise in both insurance law and government affairs. Mrs. Hargrove, she said during our first meeting in her Park Avenue office, based on the evidence you've provided, you have one of the strongest wrongful denial cases I've ever seen. I don't want to sue the insurance company, I said. I want something more important than money. What do you want? I want them to publicly acknowledge what my husband did. I want them to admit they tried to deny the claim of a national hero. And I want to make sure this never happens to another military widow. Rebecca smiled. I like your thinking. What you're describing is essentially a public relations campaign combined with legal pressure. Very effective strategy. She spread Michael's documents across her conference table, his final letter, the FBI's analysis of his actions, photographs of the evidence he'd secured, and transcripts of his heroic final communication. With this documentation, Consolidated Life Insurance Company has no choice but to pay your claim in full. But more than that, they'll want to avoid the public embarrassment of having tried to deny benefits to a Medal of Honor recipient. How do we make this public? Carefully and strategically. We start by demanding a formal apology and full payment plus damages. Then we suggest they might want to establish a fund for families of intelligence operatives killed in the line of duty. Rebecca pulled out a legal pad and began drafting our strategy. If they refuse, we go public with the story. I have contacts at the New York Times, Washington Post, and several television networks who would be very interested in this story. What about the CIA's non-disclosure requirements? The information about your husband's heroism is already President is planning to award him the Medal of Honor publicly. The CIA can't force you to hide his sacrifice. While Rebecca worked on the legal strategy, I had another battle to fight. Margaret had been calling daily since Tom's arrest, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails about family unity and protecting Michael's memory. I decided it was time to end her manipulation once and for all. I called her that evening and arranged to meet at a neutral location, the coffee shop where Michael and I had often had breakfast on Sunday mornings. Margaret arrived looking haggard, older than her 70 years. The stress of Tom's arrest and the FBI investigation had clearly taken its toll. "Lucy, thank God you agreed to see me," she said, settling into the booth across from me. "We need to talk about the family situation." "There is no family situation," I said calmly. "Tom is in federal prison for espionage. You've been reassigned by the CIA pending a full investigation of your operational security practices. And I'm Michael's widow, which makes me the only family that matters for his legacy." "That's not fair," Margaret protested. "Tom made mistakes, but he's still Michael's brother, and I've served my country for 30 years. "Tom didn't make mistakes," I said. "He committed treason. He sold information that put Michael's life in danger. He took Russian money in exchange for intelligence that helped foreign operatives track American agents." I pulled out copies of the FBI's evidence against Tom, financial records showing payments from Russian accounts, recordings of his conversations with foreign handlers, evidence that his information had compromised multiple CIA operations. "Your brother isn't a patriot who made errors in judgment," I continued. "He's a traitor who sold his country and his family for money." Margaret studied the documents, her face growing paler with each page. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I thought he was just asking about family history." "You gave him classified information because you thought you were smarter than the CIA's security protocols," I said. "You thought you could trust family more than you could trust operational procedures." "I was trying to protect the family legacy." "The family legacy is Michael's heroism, not your misguided attempts to control information that wasn't yours to control." I showed her the FBI's reconstruction of Michael's final mission, the evidence of his sacrifice, the proof that he died saving hundreds of thousands of lives. "This is Michael's legacy," I said. "Not your secrets, not Tom's betrayal, not the CIA's desire to keep everything classified. Michael died as one of the greatest heroes in American history." Margaret was crying by now, but I wasn't finished. "For 34 years, you treated me like an outsider because you thought I wasn't smart enough or strong enough to understand Michael's world. But you were wrong about everything." I pulled out Rebecca Patterson's legal documents, the demand letter to Consolidated Life Insurance, the strategy for publicizing Michael's story, the plans for establishing a memorial fund in his honor. "I'm not just Michael's widow anymore," I said. "I'm the guardian of his legacy. And I'm going to make sure the world knows what he really did." "The CIA won't approve of this publicity," Margaret said weakly. "The CIA doesn't get to decide how I honor my husband's memory. Michael spent his life serving his country in secret. Now it's time for his country to know what he sacrificed for them." I stood up to leave, but Margaret grabbed my wrist. "Lucy, please, I know I made mistakes, but I loved Michael too. He was my little brother. I was trying to protect him. You protected him by lying to his wife for 34 years. You protected him by giving classified information to a man who sold it to foreign intelligence services." "I was doing what I thought was right. You were doing what made you feel important and in control," I said. "But you never understood what was really important to Michael." I pulled out one of his letters from the safety deposit box, the one where he'd written about me being the strongest person he knew. "Michael knew I could handle the truth," I said. He knew I was strong enough to understand his sacrifice and brave enough to honor his memory properly. You never gave me credit for that strength, but Michael did. What do you want from me? Margaret asked. I want you to publicly acknowledge that Michael died as a hero. I want you to admit that your operational security failures contributed to the danger he faced, and I want you to support the memorial fund we're establishing in his name. And if I refuse, then you'll be remembered as the CIA agent whose incompetence helped get her own brother killed. The choice is yours. Margaret sat in silence for several minutes, staring at the evidence of Michael's heroism and her own failures. All right, she said finally. I'll cooperate with your memorial plans. I'll testify about Michael's sacrifice if needed. But Lucy, I really did love him, and I really was trying to protect him. I know, I said, and for the first time in 34 years, I felt something like sympathy for Margaret. But loving someone and protecting them aren't the same thing as controlling them. Michael didn't need protection from me. He needed support, trust, and the freedom to be himself, even though that meant lying to you. Even though that meant lying to me about everything except what mattered most, that he loved me, and that he was fighting for something good. As I walked away from that coffee shop, I realized that my relationship with Michael's family was finally honest. No more lies, no more manipulation, no more secrets used as weapons. Margaret would help me honor Michael's memory because it was the right thing to do, not because she was trying to control me. And Tom would spend the rest of his life in prison, knowing that his greed had contributed to his brother's death. Justice, I was learning, wasn't always about punishment. Sometimes it was about truth, accountability, and making sure the right people were honored for the right reasons. Michael had died a hero, and I was going to make sure the world knew it. The Medal of Honor ceremony was scheduled for December 15, 2001, exactly 3 months after Michael's death. President Bush himself would present the award in a private White House ceremony, with select family members and CIA officials in attendance. But first, there was one final family gathering. I needed to orchestrate a meeting where all the lies would finally be exposed and all the accounts would be settled. I arranged it for the day before the ceremony, in the conference room of Rebecca Patterson's law firm. Margaret would be there, fresh from her CIA debriefing. Tom would attend via video conference from federal prison. The insurance company's executives would be present, along with Agent Rodriguez and Agent Chen representing the FBI and CIA respectively. And for the first time in months, I felt completely in control. Margaret arrived first, looking nervous and diminished. The past weeks of investigation had stripped away her air of authority, revealing the frightened woman underneath. Lucy, she said, attempting her old patronizing tone. I hope you understand that everything I did was to protect Michael's memory. We'll see about that, I replied, gesturing to the chair across from me. Tom appeared on the video screen from his prison cell, looking haggard and desperate. His orange jumpsuit was a stark reminder of how far he'd fallen from the entitled man who'd tried to steal my husband's insurance money. Lucy, he said, his voice distorted by the poor connection. I want you to know that I never intended for Michael to get hurt. You took $50,000 from Russian intelligence the day before the attacks, I said, reading from Agent Rodriguez's report. You sold information about Michael's mission timeline, his contact protocols, and his operational methods. What did you think was going to happen? I thought they just wanted general information about CIA operations. I didn't know they were planning to use it against Michael specifically. You didn't know because you didn't care, Agent Chen interjected. You needed money to pay your gambling debts, and you sold your brother's life to get it. Mr. Williams, from Consolidated Life Insurance, cleared his throat nervously. Mrs. Hargrove, before we begin, I want to present you with this. He handed me an official document, a check for $650,000, representing the full insurance policy plus damages, interest, and a good faith payment for the company's initial attempt to deny my claim. We also want to present you with this, he continued, producing a beautifully framed certificate. Consolidated Life Insurance Company is establishing the Michael Hargrove Memorial Fund for families of intelligence operatives killed in the line of duty. We're seeding the fund with $1 million and committing to ongoing support. I looked at the certificate, surprised by the emotions it stirred. Michael's name would live on, helping other families who'd faced what I'd faced. But Tom wasn't finished. Lucy, I know I made mistakes, but I'm still Michael's brother. Don't I deserve some consideration, some help with my legal fees? The audacity of his request left everyone in the room speechless. Even from prison, facing espionage charges that could keep him locked up for the rest of his life, Tom was still thinking about money. "Tom," I said, my voice steady and cold, "let me tell you what you deserve." I pulled out the Medal of Honor citation that would be read at tomorrow's ceremony. The words were powerful, describing Michael's heroism in language that captured the magnitude of his sacrifice. "You deserve to know that while you were selling secrets to foreign enemies, your brother was risking his life to save American lives. You deserve to know that the intelligence you sold to the Russians may have contributed to his death. That's not fair. You deserve to know that Michael died preventing a second wave of terrorist attacks that would have killed hundreds of thousands of Americans. You deserve to know that he's being awarded the highest honor this country can bestow." Tom's face crumpled on the video screen. For the first time, the full weight of his betrayal seemed to hit him. "And you deserve to know," I continued, "that you will spend the rest of your life in prison, while Michael is remembered as one of the greatest heroes in American history." Margaret was crying now, quietly but steadily. "Lucy, I know Tom betrayed Michael. I know I failed in my operational security. But we're still family. Can't we find some way to what? To pretend the last 34 years didn't happen. To pretend you didn't lie to me about who you were. To pretend Tom didn't sell Michael's life for gambling money." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Manhattan. Somewhere in this city, families were still mourning loved ones lost on September 11th. But now, they would know that people like Michael had died fighting to prevent even greater tragedies. "Margaret, you asked me once if I thought Michael only married me because his CIA legend required a wife. Do you remember that?" "Yes," she whispered. "I've thought about that question a lot over the past few months, and I've realized that it doesn't matter why Michael married me. What matters is how he loved me every single day for 34 years. I turned back to face the room. Michael chose to love me honestly within the constraints of his impossible situation. He chose to make our marriage real, even though everything about his identity was constructed. Tom, you chose to betray your brother for money. Margaret, you chose to treat me like an enemy instead of family. Those were your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." "What about forgiveness?" Margaret asked. "What about family loyalty?" "Michael was loyal to his family," I said. "He was loyal to me, to his country, to the people he'd sworn to protect. That's the kind of loyalty that matters." "I want forgiveness, too," Tom said from the screen. "I want to make things right. You can start by serving your prison sentence without complaint," I said. "You can start by acknowledging that Michael died a hero while you lived as a traitor. You can start by never again asking his widow to help you with anything." Agent Rodriguez spoke up. "Mrs. Hargrove, is there anything else you need from this meeting?" I looked around the room, at Margaret's tears, at Tom's desperation, at the insurance executive's discomfort, at the evidence of Michael's heroism spread across the table. "Yes," I said. "I need everyone in this room to understand that Michael Hargrove, Michael Kowalski, was the finest man any of us will ever know. I need you to understand that he died saving lives, not just on September 11th, but throughout his entire career. I need Margaret to stop trying to control his legacy and start supporting it. I need Tom to accept responsibility for his betrayal without asking for mercy he doesn't deserve. And I need all of you to remember that the woman Michael chose to marry, the woman he loved for 34 years, the woman he trusted with his heart if not his secrets, that woman is strong enough to honor his memory properly. Tomorrow, the President of the United States will present me with Michael's Medal of Honor. I'll accept it not just as his widow, but as his partner in a love story that survived impossible circumstances. And then I'll spend the rest of my life making sure people know what real heroism looks like." The room was silent for several moments. Finally, Margaret spoke. "Lucy, you're right. About everything. Michael would be proud of how you're handling this." "I know he would," I said, "because he always believed I was stronger than anyone else realized. Now I believe it too." As the meeting ended and people filed out of the conference room, I felt something I hadn't experienced since September 11th. Not the peace of closure, but the peace of knowing that justice had been served and truth had been told. Tomorrow, I would stand in the White House and accept the nation's highest honor on behalf of my husband. But today, I had done something just as important. I had claimed my place as the guardian of Michael's legacy. And I had made sure that everyone who'd underestimated me, including myself, understood that love and strength weren't mutually exclusive. They were the same thing. The Medal of Honor ceremony was smaller than I'd expected but more powerful than I'd imagined. President Bush presented the award in the Oval Office, with only a handful of witnesses: Present Agent Rodriguez, Agent Chen, Rebecca Patterson, David Chen from Michael's insurance office, and surprisingly, Margaret. Mrs. Hargrove, the president, said as he handed me the medal in its blue ribbon, "Your husband's sacrifice prevented what could have been the most devastating terrorist attack in American history. The nation owes him an yuan, unpayable debt." The medal was heavier than I'd expected. Solid gold with an intricate design that spoke to the weight of the honor it represented. But it was the citation that moved me to tears. For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty, the president read aloud. Agent Michael Kowalski, while operating under the cover identity of Michael Hargrove, infiltrated a terrorist network planning multiple attacks on American soil. On September 11, 2001, Agent Kowalski secured critical intelligence that prevented a second wave of attacks targeting nuclear facilities. His actions in the final moments of his life saved an estimated 200,000 American lives. 200,000 lives. The number still took my breath away. After the ceremony, there was a small reception where I finally met some of Michael's CIA colleagues, people who'd worked with him over the years, who'd known him as both Michael Kowalski and Michael Hargrove, who understood the impossible balance he'd maintained for 3 decades. "Your husband was the best operative I ever worked with," said a woman who introduced herself only as Agent Morrison, the same Morrison who'd been sending the encrypted messages to Michael's device. "He never lost sight of why we do this work. He never forgot that we're protecting real people, real families, real lives." "He talked about you constantly," said another agent, a man with graying hair who looked like he'd seen too much of the world's darkness. "You were his anchor, Mrs. Hargrove. You kept him human in a job that can strip away your humanity if you're not careful." But the most meaningful conversation came from Margaret, who approached me as the reception was winding down. "Lucy," she said, her voice tentative, "I wanted to apologize. Not just for the operational security failures, but for 34 years of treating you like you weren't good enough for Michael." "Why did you do it?" I asked. "What made you think I was the enemy?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, looking out the window at the White House lawn. "I think I was jealous," she said finally. "Michael loved you in a way that was pure, uncomplicated. In our world, everything is layered with deception and hidden agendas. But with you, he could just be himself." "He wasn't himself with me," I pointed out. "He was living a completely constructed identity." "No," Margaret said, shaking her head. "The identity was constructed, but the man was real. The way he looked at you, the way he talked about you, the way he prioritized your happiness over his own safety, that was the truest thing about him." She pulled out a document I hadn't seen before: settlement agreement between the CIA and me. "The agency wants to provide you with a pension equal to what Michael would have received if he'd lived to retire," she explained. "It's not much by civilian standards, but it's what we can do to acknowledge your sacrifice too." "My sacrifice, Lucy. You were married to a man who disappeared for weeks at a time without explanation. You supported him through mysterious phone calls, strange work hours, and emotional distance that must have been heartbreaking. You loved him without understanding what you were really supporting." "I was just being a wife." "You were being a patriot," Margaret said. "The CIA couldn't function without spouses like you. People who love us enough to let us do dangerous work without asking questions that might compromise our safety." The settlement was generous: a monthly pension, full health benefits, and access to counseling services for families of intelligence operatives. But more important than the money was the recognition that I had served my country too, in my own way. 3 months later, the Michael Hargrove Memorial Fund held its first event, a scholarship dinner for children of intelligence operatives killed in the line of duty. The ballroom was filled with families like mine, people who'd loved someone enough to let them serve their country in secret. Tom was noticeably absent, serving the first year of his 25-year prison sentence, but Margaret was there, working alongside me to honor Michael's memory. Our relationship would never be easy, but it was finally honest. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said as I addressed the crowd, "we're here tonight to remember people who died serving their country in ways the public may never know. They weren't soldiers in uniform or diplomats with official titles. They were ordinary people who chose to do extraordinary things to keep America safe." I looked out at the audience: widows, children, parents, siblings, all connected by love for someone who'd made the ultimate sacrifice. My husband Michael died preventing terrorist attacks that could have killed hundreds of thousands of Americans, but he also lived for 34 years as a man who came home every night to a wife who loved him. That's the balance we need to remember. These weren't just agents or operatives, they were human beings with families who loved them. Tonight, we honor their sacrifice, but we also honor the families who supported them, who loved them, who let them go into danger because we understood that some things are worth fighting for. After my speech, a young woman approached Miss Sarah Collins, whose father had been killed in Afghanistan while working for the CIA. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said, "thank you for making this fund possible. My father died when I was 12, and no one could ever tell me what he really did. It helps to know there are people like you who understand. Your father was a hero," I told her. "And you're here tonight because people who love heroes need to take care of each other." As the evening wound down, I found myself thinking about Michael's final letter, his words about being proud of what he'd done, about our life together being the greatest gift he'd ever received. I was proud of his service, proud of his sacrifice, proud of the love we'd shared despite impossible circumstances, but I was also proud of what I'd become since his death: a woman, strong enough to claim his legacy, smart enough to outmaneuver people who'd underestimated me, and brave enough to tell the truth about what real heroism looked like. The insurance settlement had given me financial security. The CIA pension had given me official recognition. The Medal of Honor had given Michael the honor he deserved. But the memorial fund had given me something more valuable: a way to make sure other families wouldn't face what I'd faced alone. A way to turn grief into purpose, loss into legacy. Michael had spent his life serving his country in secret. Now I would spend mine making sure that service was remembered, honored, and supported, that it wasn't the retirement we'd planned together, but it was a life that honored everything he'd fought for, everything he'd died protecting. And somehow, I knew he would be proud. 1 year after September 11th, I returned to our small Queens apartment to pack up the last of Michael's belongings. The memorial fund was thriving. I'd moved to a new home closer to the city, and I was finally ready to let go of the physical reminders of our old life together. Agent Rodriguez had called that morning with news that the last member of Ahmad Hassan's terrorist network had been captured in Pakistan, using intelligence from the briefcase Michael had secured. The circle was finally complete. Every person involved in planning the attacks had been brought to justice. "Mrs. Hargrove," he'd said, "I wanted you to know that your husband's sacrifice is still saving lives. The intelligence he gathered continues to help us disrupt terrorist operations around the world." As I sorted through Michael's desk for the final time, I found something I'd missed in all my previous searches: a small envelope tucked into the very back of his filing cabinet. Behind folders I'd never had reason to examine, on the outside, in Michael's careful handwriting, were the words, "For Lucille, to be opened on our 35th anniversary. Our 35th anniversary, June 10, 2002. Yesterday." Inside was a letter dated just 2 weeks before September 11th. Along with a small velvet jewelry box. "My darling Lucy," the letter began. "If you're reading this on our 35th anniversary, then I've managed to keep my most important secret for 1 more year: how much I love you. I know that our marriage has been built on lies about my identity, my work, my background. I know that you've supported a man you could never fully understand, married a stranger whose real name you didn't even know. But Lucy, the love between us has been the truest thing in my life. Every lie I've told has been to protect that truth. Every secret I've kept has been to preserve what we have together. I'm writing this letter because my current assignment is more dangerous than usual. If something happens to me, I want you to know that you haven't been loving a fiction. You've been loving the real me, the man who comes home to you every night, the man who finds peace in your smile, the man who measures every risk against the possibility of not seeing you again. Michael Hargrove may be a constructed identity, but the man who loves you is completely real." I opened the jewelry box with trembling hands. Inside was a simple gold ring, clearly very old, with an inscription on the inside: MK2LH, forever true. Michael Kowalski to Lucille Hargrove. His real name to my real name. The truth, finally, without any lies or cover stories or operational necessities. There was more to the letter. "Lucy, I've been saving money in a special account for our retirement, not the CIA accounts, not the operational funds. but money that's ours alone. When you find this letter, call the number below and ask for account manager Helen Morrison. She'll help you access what I've set aside for our future together. Helen Morrison. Not Margaret Morrison, but someone else, entirely a bank employee, who'd been helping Michael save money for a retirement we'd never get to share. The account number is 062867, our wedding anniversary, plus the year we met. The password is Lucy's Anchor, because that's what you've been for me all these years. I called the number immediately. Helen Morrison was a kind woman who'd been managing Michael's retirement account for over a decade. Mrs. Hargrove, she said, your husband spoke of you constantly. He was so looking forward to retirement, to finally being able to travel with you openly, to tell you stories about all the places he'd been. How much is in the account? $1.2 million. He wanted to make sure you'd be comfortable for the rest of your life, able to do whatever made you happy. $1.2 million. Michael had been quietly building a nest egg for us while maintaining his cover identity and serving his country. Even in the world of lies and secrets, he'd been planning for a future where we could be completely honest with each other. The final paragraph of his letter brought me to tears. Lucy, if I don't survive my current mission, I want you to use this money to build the life you deserve. Travel to all the places I wish I could have taken you. Help people the way you've always wanted to help. Find joy in ways that honor the love we've shared. And know that wherever I am, whatever happens to me, you have been the greatest happiness of my life. You made me better than I ever thought I could be. You made me human in a world that was trying to turn me into something else. Be happy, my love. Be strong. Be proud. And remember that true love doesn't need perfect honesty to be perfectly real. Forever yours, Michael. Both of them. I sat in our empty apartment, holding his final letter and the ring he'd had made with our real names, and felt something I hadn't experienced since before September 11th. Complete peace. Michael had loved me, not the CIA asset who needed a wife for his cover story, not the constructed identity who required a believable domestic life, but the real man underneath all the lies and secrets. He'd loved me enough to save money for our future, to plan for a retirement where he could finally tell me the truth, to make sure I'd be cared for if he didn't survive his dangerous work. And I had loved him, the real him, the essential him, the part of him that came home to me every night, regardless of what name he was using or what secrets he was keeping. 6 months later, I used part of Michael's retirement money to expand the memorial fund, establishing regional offices in 5 major cities to better serve families of intelligence operatives. I used another portion to travel visiting the places Michael had been posted over the years, seeing the world through the eyes of someone who'd loved a man who'd served his country in those places. In London, I met with MI6 officials who'd worked with Michael and spoke of his professionalism and dedication. In Berlin, I visited the safe house where he'd spent 2 months in 1994, gathering intelligence on arms dealers. In Tel Aviv, I had dinner with Mossad agents who considered Michael one of their most trusted American contacts. Everywhere I went, I found people who'd known Michael not as the constructed identity of Michael Hargrove, but as the dedicated professional who'd risked his life to make the world safer. But the most meaningful trip was to Detroit, where I met Michael's childhood friends and visited the neighborhood where Michael Kowalski had grown up. I learned about the young man who'd volunteered for Vietnam, who'd served his country in special forces, who'd been recruited by the CIA because of his intelligence, his courage, and his unshakable moral compass. Michael was always the kid who stood up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves, said his high school friend Jimmy Kowalski, no relation, despite the shared name. When the CIA recruited him, we weren't surprised. He'd been serving others his whole life. Did he ever talk about his wife? I asked. All the time. He said you were the reason he was able to do the work he did. He said loving you kept him centered, kept him focused on what he was really fighting for. 2 years after Michael's death, I received a call from Agent Chansira, as I'd learned to think of her with unexpected news. Mrs. Hargrove, there's someone here who wants to meet you. Someone who knew your husband very well. The someone turned out to be Amira Hassan, the CIA operative whose letters I'd found in Michael's safety deposit box. She was older than I'd expected, in her 50s, with graying hair and eyes that had seen too much of the world's darkness. Mrs. Hargrove, she said in accented but perfect English, I wanted to meet the woman who meant so much to my partner, Michael, and I worked together for 8 years, from 1993 to 2001. He was the finest agent I've ever known. But more than that, He was a good man, and he loved you with a devotion that was remarkable even in our world of shifting loyalties. Amira told me stories about Michael that I'd never heard, how he'd turned down promotions that would have required longer separations from me, how he'd insisted on returning home for every anniversary and birthday, how he'd carried photographs of me on every mission. Mrs. Hargrove, she said as our conversation was ending, I want you to know that your husband's love for you made him a better agent. It gave him something to protect, something to fight for, something to come home to. You were his mission, in the best possible way. Now, 3 years after September 11th, I live in a different world than the one I inhabited as Michael Hargrove's wife. I know the truth about my husband's work, his sacrifice, his heroism. I understand the world he moved in, the dangers he faced, the choices he made, but the most important truth hasn't changed. Michael loved me, and I loved him, and that love was real, despite all the lies that surrounded it. The Memorial Fund has helped over 200 families of intelligence operatives. The scholarship program has sent 50 children to college. The support network has connected hundreds of people who understand the unique challenges of loving someone who serves their country in secret. And every morning, I wake up wearing the ring Michael had made, with our real names, MK2LH, forever true. I think about him every day, but not with the crushing grief that characterized the first months after his death. Now I think about him with pride, with gratitude, with the deep satisfaction of knowing that I was loved by one of the finest men who ever lived. Michael died saving 200,000 lives, but he lived saving one life, mine. He gave me 34 years of love, protection, and partnership that prepared me to survive losing him. He gave me the strength to honor his memory, the wisdom to forgive his necessary lies, and the courage to build a new life that serves the same values he died protecting. I may have been married to a man whose name wasn't real, whose background was constructed, whose work was secret, but I was loved by a man whose heart was true, whose sacrifice was genuine, whose devotion was absolute, and that love, real, honest, transformative love, is the foundation of everything good that has happened since. Michael Kowalski, Michael Hargrove, Agent Nightingale, whatever name he used, he was my husband, and I was his truth in a world full of lies, his anchor in a storm of secrets, his reason for coming home safely every day until the day he chose to risk everything to save the lives of strangers. I miss him. I'll always miss him. But I'm proud of him, proud of us, proud of the love that was strong enough to survive impossible circumstances. And I'm grateful for 34 years with a hero. Grateful for the chance to honor his memory. Grateful for a love story that proved truth and lies aren't mutually exclusive when the heart is completely committed. Michael was right about me being stronger than anyone realized, but he was wrong about one thing. I didn't just love a man I couldn't fully understand. I loved a man who was exactly who he needed to be, when he needed to be it, for as long as he could be it, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.